Good afternoon. Bonjour à tous. Welcome to this roundtable on the healthcare industry of tomorrow. Well, why now this topic, right? I think there is no denying that the last couple of years have been a turning point for the healthcare industry, right? First, what we call healthcare has expanded to digital therapeutics, AI-based diagnostic, health tech. We saw emergence of new business models to combine products and services, vertical integrations, sometimes with providers. And as well, we start to see changes in the way we innovate with biotechs, big pharma partnering to combine both the excellence in fundamental research with expertise on clinical development, production, commercialization, et cetera, right? And of course, the pandemic has put the healthcare industry under the spotlight, demonstrating its phenomenal innovation power and ability to make a change at scale. And so, making us wonder, what if the speed and scale we saw during the pandemic could actually be the new normal for the healthcare industry? What would it take? And so what should be the shape of the healthcare industry of tomorrow? This is the question we'll try to address today with our 6 panelists, whom I welcome. So, first things first, and I would love to get the wisdom of the crowd on what does it really mean to go towards One Health for the healthcare industry? Yeah, because healthcare was previously creative, medication-driven, whereas we know now that individual in good health requires a more holistic approach, looking at lifestyle, environment. So, in a nutshell, going from treatment-driven to patient centricity. Muriel, first question for you. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire l'orientation patient?
Muriel, what does it mean to be patient-focused, and are we at the right level today?
Merci beaucoup. Je vais m'exprimer
en français. Thank you very much. I'm going to speak French, says Muriel, because I think it will be easier for me. But I think you will understand through the interpreters. So, I've been working with the Strategic Council on Health Industries in the last few months, and the way that we've been looking at things from the start is really looking at a patient-centric journey, and then from the patient, we look at all the different steps all the way to the industry. I'm not a representative of the industry, but the idea is really to have this very integrated vision on the clinical side for patients, going from prevention to prevention, so prevention, diagnosis, care, post-care, and again, you go back to prevention at the end of the day. So it's on this entire patient journey that we looked at things, and the medical journey as well, going from the design, research, all the way to putting a drug on the market, and then following up after the product is on the market, taking into account all products on the market and technologies that could impact the care for the patients. So it's this vision, this kind of holistic vision that we haven't integrated so that we could open up this system that is as close as possible to One Health as you have just described it.
Merci, Muriel.
Thank you, Muriel.
Patient centricity, so it's looking at patient environment, and sometimes it includes animal, right? Marc, talking to the CEVA person there, what are the implications of animal health on human health, and why is that so important?
Je crois que, et si vous me permettez, je veux aussi parler en
I'm
français.
also going
Je
to
suis
speak
vétérinaire de
French.
formation.
I'm a vet by training, and so when the
pour nous,
pandemic
d'une
struck,
certaine façon,
for
il n'y avait rien
us,
de neuf.
in a way, there was nothing
On
new.
est habitué à
We are
mener
used
une
to
sorte de médecine de guerre,
having this kind of
où la dimension économique est absolument clé,
field
et
medicine,
où
where the
l'intérêt
financial
du
dimension
groupe
is
prévaut
key,
sur l'intérêt de l'individu.
where
Alors,
the
c'est un peu
interest of the
atypique,
group is more
mais quand
important
vous
than the
mettez
interest of the
l'équation
individual. But if you look at the
économique et le
economic
collectif, et
equation
vous avez
and
les
the
moyens, quand il
collective,
le
and you
faut,
have the
de
means when you
vacciner,
can to vaccinate. When you're looking at the economic dimension, the first thing is to prevent big epidemics, and we've had some, nevertheless. Sometimes you have to block roads when you have foot and mouth, you have the army intervening. So for us, it was something that was relatively traditional, let's say. And before the message of the president, we had 5 COVID cases. We did an epidemic survey, and we realized there was a certain duration, about 12 hours before the first symptoms, and so we put in place some rules. And for the next 18 months, the scenario we designed was accurate. And so the period really showed how fragile the societies were. Eric Orsonin said the simplest organism has to go through a cell to multiply. How can the simplest organism, how was it able to put to its knees the most evolved society? Well, in any case, those who couldn't imagine One Health, including human health, including animal health and ecosystems and environmental health, haven't really understood what was happening here. The complexity of human health is that you have a sentimental dimension, you have the media, you have everybody speaking to say nothing, and the sort of weak signal and white noise is increased. I went to all sides to explain what was happening, why the disease was actually relatively simple, because the idea is to understand the 90%, not just the 10%. PCR tests, which we understand now. As you heard through other vets, there was a lot of frustration during the period because we didn't get the floor. You have to know that coronaviruses is something we know very well. The first diseases that were recognized as coronavirus are bronchitis for poultry, gastroenteritis for pigs, and so we understand variants, we understand how they evolve, we know these diseases very well, and we have protector-type vaccines that were able to protect even from variants, so we know all that. So we've been watching all this as spectators, and we thought, why didn't they call on us? Despite our limited knowledge, we knew vaccines. We know about attenuated live vaccines. We know they can be limited. We know vectorized vaccines. So we know the technologies, and we experience all this with a lot of frustration. Even though I admit it can be very difficult to make these decisions. As Mr. Larcher was saying, the chairman of the Senate said the vaccination rate in France is very high. 80% is high, a bit more in France if you count over 12. But in farming, it might be 100%. You might keep some sentinels out, but that's it. So it's very paradoxical, because there's another element that is very curious, is conversely, personalized, tailor-made medicine with pets is extremely developed. And so in humans, we went from tailor-made individualized medicine and caring for rare diseases to collective care, and it's pretty much the other way around for pets. With the lockdown, people would develop greater links with their pets. And today in the US, 84% of people don't say they own a pet, they say they're a parent of a pet. So it's called pet humanization, 60 to 70% only in Europe. And so as curious as it can be, we went from collective war-type medicine to individualized medicine for pets. In the UK, for instance, vets are not numerous enough, and they ask owners not to adopt an animal because they don't have enough room anymore. They can't see them. So it's a paradigm, and we're going to follow the pet. The pet has become a child, and so we're going to follow what's happening in human health. Thank you, Marc.
So we see more interconnections, collaborations between human health, animal health, being in a context of pandemic or actually not. And plus this, we have new fields of research, such as cell and gene therapies, for example, who have an enormous potential of moving the needle, and we are at the, at the very first, I would say, to unveil the potential that it can have. And so all of these factors require to actually change the way we really do innovation, right, in the healthcare industry. And so turning to you, perhaps, John, right, what did the healthcare industry learn from the pandemic relative to the ways to innovate, to what was required, right? Have we started to apply some of the learnings outside of this context?
Yeah, I think one of the real challenges, you're in essence talking about a silo, and I would argue that in many ways, industry was that way relative to academic and public health medicine. I'll talk about it more, down the road, but I think, there are these fundamental barriers, and frankly, it was our ability to respond in the way we did to the pandemic was entirely due to a pre-existing set of collaborators that we've worked with for 2.5 decades in academics that we could turn to. In the US, when the very first cases were identified, they all went to the US CDC. I even called the CDC to ask if we could get specimens, and I wasn't successful. And I've worked with them through the years, for many years, so 2 decades or more. So, there were very unique challenges, and really it was, where your starting point was, dictated where you could go. You mentioned the viral load and, PCR versus antigen. I can't tell you how many months of discussions while we were developing these tests, but just from a regulatory standpoint, from public health, it was really epidemiologists who understood that if you could get the 90%, get those who were transmitting, you were getting the ones that mattered. And that was just an enormous barrier that I would argue we have not successfully managed across the globe. We certainly have. We've come a long ways, even the US. Now we have tests that can be taken at home. But we had a lot to learn. It was a new virus. Where do you sample? Where do you start? Nasopharyngeal, nasal, saliva. There were a lot of questions that were challenges that we had to deal with early on. And so we were all learning, as we were moving along.
Turning to you, perhaps, Olivier, we see that, we need to collaborate. To respond to that, to collaborate, between, healthcare providers, pharma, et cetera, at an international scale sometimes, but as well, I guess, in national scale as well, right? So these coalitions, what does that bring? How does that help, I don't know, go faster, actually?
I think that this COVID-19 crisis revealed the importance of collaboration within the industry at all levels, and the importance of the healthcare industry. Well, we know that it's been a strategic sector identified more than 20 years ago, and COVID only revealed it to the world. So that, in that sense, it's good news. It's bad news bringing some good news on a sector that's been left to the side and weakened from the moment when science really accelerated. It's accelerated considerably. That means we can really reinvent the whole value chain. And over the last 10 years, there's been a massive acceleration, which is why it's so important to collaborate and work together. Why was it so massive? Well, whether it's research or marketing, I think we can accelerate everything today. I think we can define new therapeutic targets. It was the case with COVID in just a few weeks. You have monoclonal antibodies that were put under production extremely fast. And so we can design molecules extremely fast, something that we didn't know how to do 15 years ago. Today, we know how to do very complex things very fast. Drugs undruggable, it's something that is actually quite great. But let me give you 2 examples. It's very important in terms of accelerating science. When you take the cerebrospinal fluid, you can look with single-cell technology, 2,000 genes on all the cells that you sample, and you can look at the malfunctioning in the cerebrospinal fluid on a patient. And this is the kind of acceleration we're seeing in the industry now, and this is why I'm fighting with many so that the industry is considered strategic and essential. There's another example. I want an oncology cluster in France. If you look at the tumor environment, you can go and look around the tumor cell, all the potential interactions with lymphocytes, fibroblasts, and find the adapted response for each patient. This is again a huge acceleration. So there are lots and lots of examples I could give you on trends and accelerations, but already you have this awareness that the industry is important, that it has to be supported, because we are at a key point in terms of the start of the acceleration. So that's the first part of my message.
Entendu, je pense.
I think you've been heard.
And to actually do that, because this acceleration, right? This requires new methodologies, new capabilities, right? So we talk data, sometimes including real-world evidence. We talk digital, et cetera, right? So for the healthcare industry, it means building, acquiring, partnering, I don't know, to get these capabilities. I turn to you, Anna Maria. For you, what are the most critical capabilities that are needed to actually release that innovation power?
Well, first, I would say we do have, especially in Europe, this innovation power. We have a very strong medical device industry as well as the pharmaceutical industry. We have seen, as you mentioned, how it can be accelerated if everyone has one focus and needs to work towards one goal. But the challenge I see is that at the moment, sometimes we take the strength for granted, and we, instead of letting the companies develop this strength, developing additional capabilities, overstrain them with additional regulations so that it's very difficult to maintain the speed and to really move forward. And you mentioned it, of course, the new innovations that are coming all have, let's say, digital elements or move into a very smart solution space. But if we don't have, for example, the right infrastructure, a European health data room, it will be very difficult to keep the leadership that we have and that we have shown and to set the standards that are then relevant for the next decade. So I think we absolutely have shown that we can accelerate and that we have a lot of power, but we also need to ensure that we don't take it for granted and let the companies, together then with universities, other research entities, work on these innovations and experiment. And a huge success of the vaccination was, of course, also because the regulatory bodies had a much better exchange on the data to see really what we can release, what we can allow, and how to move forward. And I think that's crucial. And don't forget, we can develop great medications. If we can't deliver them to the patient, then there's no use. So it really requires this exchange that has worked really well during the pandemic.
John, turning to you maybe, because we were exchanging on this. Sometimes having the capabilities for the healthcare industry is kind of enough, but as you actually said, Anna Maria, to make a difference at the patient, sometimes it means building capabilities outside of your own industry, right? So is it something that you've already seen, considered, and what are the steps that you started to take there?
Well, as we've thought about this, and really, obviously we found out about this virus when everybody else in the world did, and in a really matter of months, we were at a point where we had launched 12 tests globally, and by the time, I guess at the end of the first quarter this year, had shipped more than 700 million tests globally. I mean, to do that, takes an enormous amount of work, and I could spend an hour talking about all the learnings as we went through the process. We were talking about supply chain. I mean, there were so many parameters. When your development cycle, our first molecular test was developed in 1 month. Our first core lab serologic test was also developed in a month. I mean, these are timelines that are years shorter than normal. So when you think about how do I go to producing 50 million of these a month within a month of launch, it's extraordinary. And what it takes to do this is not just R&D, it's supply chain, it's so many other areas. And in the midst of this, you have quality and regulatory. And so one of the things that we appreciated, though, is that we had a long history in viral surveillance. We're unique in our industry in the size and scope of the program. It's been going on 2.5 decades to monitor mainly bloodborne type viruses at that point. But that was the head start for us. And within that team, as soon as sequences were available, they weren't creating a product, they were creating a prototype test that we could use to evaluate specimens. So it wasn't on the product development cycle, but that head start, when the time was, we realized we needed to do it, and we recognized that was the most important first tool we could develop. That preparation made all the difference. And today, as of this March, we've actually created what we call the Abbott Pandemic Defense Coalition. And it's a first-of-a-kind program which has industry, academics, public health, with the idea of having a global coalition of sites that are trained to look for newly emerging, whether they're new viruses or re-emerging viruses, and then mitigate that emergence for infectious diseases that have pandemic potential. And really what's unique here is this isn't sites just looking for something, it's the fact that we're going to enable them with tools to be able to not only look for viruses, I mean, we're providing technology, exchanging it, data will be shared across all of these groups, techniques, I mean, today, as you were speaking about the changes in the world, think with hepatitis C. Non-A, non-B hepatitis in my world went on for, I don't know, 12 or 14 years before we knew what caused it. Today, we could take 300 mils of a blood sample, and within probably 2 or 3 days, if it was a hepatitis C sample, I guarantee you we could sequence the entire virus and have characterized it. I mean, that's the difference in the power of what we have today. And so, really, I think ultimately it's creating these relationships, with the hope we could sustain it in those circumstances, and feeding information into public health sectors as well to benefit everybody. I mean, the point was we all, everybody had to participate in order to be successful. And so the hope is we could identify something a little earlier and then mitigate and control it as best possible.
Thank you, John. Looking at the, perhaps looking for a bit, the opinion in terms of processes, right? Because we talk capabilities, etc. In terms of processes, is there space to ease it, to simplify stuff? Thomas?
Oui, il y a des mesures, et peut-être la première d'entre elles, c'est de créer un environnement simple, transparent, prévisible. Et de ce point de vue, le président de la République a annoncé dans le plan environment, and in fact, the French president has announced very strong action along these lines, with the access, immediate access to market, with a validation period of 2 years, more also an objective of market access shorter than the European standards, also some work on remote monitoring, and also measures or action to simplify the access of innovative SMEs to public tendering processes in order to be able to valorize these innovations better. And these simplifications, the President would like to extend them at European level, for example, about harmonization of the drug packaging at the European level. And together we have to promote other types of simplifications and harmonization at European level. Yeah. With the same mindset.
Europe, because we started to say, hey, what can the healthcare industry do? What can we simplify? But how should we think about the role of Europe, right? How could we create a European environment which is as favorable as possible to actually have this healthcare industry innovation grow? Of course, COVID-19 started to show this willingness and a couple of progress in the willingness to orchestrate a bit better, but there are still a couple of limitations. Turning to you, Anna Maria, given you're from Germany and a European as a say, born and bred, so to say, European company, exactly. How should we think about the role of Europe?
Well, Europe has a crucial role in really giving us as, let's say, European company, another market that is big enough to really explore. We discussed a lot about opportunities with data management, so we need this unified access to European data, otherwise it will be difficult for us to compete against the data space in the US as well as in China, for example. And Europe can, as the minister said, of course, play the crucial role in harmonizing and making it easier for the different companies and different players to really release the power, the knowledge that we have, because our strength has not only always been to innovate and have great new ideas, but to make them applicable to our markets. We have a very common, as different as we sometimes think we are in Europe, we have a very common understanding that, healthcare should be accessible to everyone. So it drove also the innovation that it can be made available to everyone and still can be financed. I mean, that's a crucial question. It's not enough to just innovate. We need to ensure we play our role as the suppliers or producers to really ensure we can still finance it. We don't like to hear it, but we all get older. So there, Europe can really, in my opinion, have a leading role in showing how this system can work, how we can have innovation, and in other parts, efficiency, as you said, also in the healthcare systems, in the hospitals, everywhere, to ensure these innovations then add value to the patients and in the end lead to better outcomes.
I can't refrain from asking the opinion of someone coming from across the Atlantic on this famous question of Europe. John, for you, and especially looking at the very big differences in the way our systems in the US or in Europe are made, what would you dream about in terms of simplification when talking about Europe?
I think, well, certainly when I think infectious disease, I mean, France has got probably one of the richest histories in this. So the point is there is a phenomenal base of academic expertise here in Europe. I think it's probably going to be working across the entire EU to build on that. I mean, certain universities have certain areas that they're stronger in, and how do you bring those together effectively and not have competition between them? More people are working together. I mean, that's critical. I think the hard part with innovation is everybody has a different definition, and innovation can take. It can reveal itself in so many different ways in different areas. So, there's innovation, and I think the important leg too is translation. And, do you have the resources to be able to move and actually take a concept, right, and coming back to it and make it accessible and affordable, which is translating it. And part of that journey is moving through, quality processes and regulatory environments. And I think overall, EU has a real advantage because you're more homogeneous for regulatory. I think when we launched, the COVID IgG test, CE mark was one aspect. We had 53 other registrations around the globe in other countries. So again, think about when we're trying to globalize the sheer amount of work, because all of those different regulatory agencies have different asks, different things, and it's cost and time on the system, fundamentally. And so I do think if somehow, really, ideally it would be globally, but the more we can do to try to homogenize and reduce these barriers, because and that's not to say, we obviously need, safe, effective, high quality products, and no one is arguing that, but it seems like we ought to be able to get there in maybe a more linear fashion.
And so are there any learnings, Marc, from animal health, actually, that we might get inspiration from your point of view, when we think about, Europe and simplification, perhaps?
Je pense que c'est absolument clé.
I believe this is key, absolutely. This is a complex issue. Overall, I'd say there are three main regulations when you want to register a product: the US, Europe, and China. Let me focus more on the US and Europe because China is still very complex at that level. But when you think about the US part for pharmaceutical products, FDA, in the European equivalent is as complex. But when you talk about vaccines and biology, which is key because this is where you have to react very quickly, you then have to face the USDA, which is like our Ministry of Agriculture, which is much more pragmatic. Vaccines develop much faster for us in the veterinarian area in the US than in Europe. The safety part is key. And they are aware, they're capable of working working differently. You can see that we have different types of vaccines, DNA, RNA, and cassette vaccines, for example, which are accepted in the US, which have no status in Europe. And we'll have to get moving, otherwise we'll have a backlog. And when you talk about the economic impact of a crisis such as the one we've had, it's terrible. We've had crises. Coronavirus is not the first one. We've been faced with influenza crisis. If we haven't got the tools very quickly, it will end and at times where you have no crisis, then it will be complicated. We know that there are huge and beautiful competencies in Europe. We can see it. It's obvious. But just give these people a possibility of expressing themselves, give them access to funds, and in a way try to simplify things. And just, I don't want to be rude, but just common sense, so to say.
Pragmatique, bon sens.
Thomas, pragmatic and common sense.
What do we put forward at the European Union, right, that goes in that direction?
Je pense que l'Europe doit apporter deux réponses majeures.
Well, I believe Europe has to give two main responses to the crisis. First of all, the right industrial policy for medications, for example, and secondly, a common ability to answer quickly. Industrial policy with about 10 member states, we're suggesting main industrial policy projects where we can get organized to fund, for example, from R&D, for example, on therapies, all the way to the production. So the whole chain for the future resilience of Europe, both in terms of innovation in companies and production. And for France, we have earmarked 1.5 billion euros of funds to fund these projects. And together with the other member states, we're building a global strategy that will enable us to have consistent projects throughout the European territories. And in fact, we have a very good reaction from French stakeholders because we made a call for a project for 300, where 300 companies, very small and very large, presented projects. And this will make the European industry much more resilient when faced with a crisis. Second thing is the ability to react very quickly. We've seen the American BARDA that has been shown that it can act. So we need to implement very quickly, as of the beginning of 2022, the beginning of an agency that will be able to do that, anticipate together future crises, be able to earmark some funds very quickly for treatment or for research programs so that they can be started quickly. And we'll have to be very careful so that the agency is very agile, very autonomous and reactive, and so that it can act when and if we have a new crisis.
What would it enable? What would it change for you?
Moi, j'y vois que du bien, évidemment, sur cette évolution, parce que.
Well, I consider this evolution as a good thing because, as was said earlier, when you're at the industry, you look at the geography by block. You look at the US, China, and Europe. And Europe is not a bloc. There's a singularity, the European marketing authorization, which is one, but then you have 27 countries with different demands for access to market. And even before, testing products in Spain, Belgium, or France is different. So this has shown that maybe we could aim at a more homogeneous Europe of health, and that's what we'd like. We want to have more simplification. Then there's other elements, industrial policy, to have something consistent, resilience when faced with a crisis, and there's probably other steps, as was mentioned. For example, databases. We're lucky enough in Europe to have very good databases. We should go even further with mega files, with critical depth. And we have very good mathematicians in Europe. We can work with machine learning and AI. And then there's creation of companies. We have a lot of universities, very high level, great academics. And in the US, when you have a high level, you can right away create a company and patent your product. But this is different in Europe. It's going to change, and it's a good thing. And we'll have to support it with the right, also with the right funds, investment funds. There was a Kimia report, which was very important. Not too many figures, but when you have 802 deals, 634 come from the US, 150 in EU. And when you look at the series C and D for projects of over 15 billion, they take place in the US. So we'll have to change something and have the critical mass. And then there's critical cultural change. Once you invest, you must simplify access to market. 27 different countries is complicated. The president of the Republic used an expression that I liked. He said, we would like to have a German-type system, which meant, in a way, a kind of convergence that could be useful, because if you think tomorrow that you can launch your products simultaneously in several countries with more or less the same regulations, it might make a change.
Marc, because we thought, capability, simplification, and you touched the mindset thing, right, Olivier? In Europe, do we have the right mindset to innovate, or do we still have a couple of, I would say, progress to make to mirror a bit what our US friends actually do?
Pardon. Pardon, j'ai pas compris votre question.
I didn't understand your question, sorry.
No, the question was, in terms of mindset, are we really there in terms of innovation mindset at the European level?
Yeah, I think so. I think we have a mindset of, on a un état d'esprit innovant.
We have an innovative mindset, but we haven't got a culture for risk. We still talk about funds also. Today, if you look at what Elon Musk did, it would be impossible in Europe. They have a culture of risk. They are pioneers in this way of working. It's anchored in their life. They're ready to take a bet, and the financial world will follow, which is not the case here, and it's a very limiting factor. Many people, when they want to have a project, they have to leave for the US. And we have major examples in this field. So I believe that, yes, we have the precautionary principle, which is something incredible, meaning that we do not innovate because of that. Because otherwise we'll block things. I do not understand. We should have a principle of innovation and not precaution. So we have a system with an aversion to risk in France, for example, where you have a lot of innovative and competent people who want to do things. I believe that there's a new policy. Many youngsters want to make headway, but at one point they'll hit the glass ceiling of funds. And when you talk about money, if you need to get 300 million, for example, for a company, and you must take a bet and run the risk of losing. But that's something the financial world doesn't do much.
Well, I guess that's the moment where we say, hey, so now, friends, how do we actually, make sure that we ourselves, stimulate the demand for innovation and the offer as well, right? So, Thomas, what are the measures there that I've taken? What's the strategy to stimulate healthcare innovation in France as well, and how does it coordinate with Europe?
On essaie d'avoir une stratégie globale qui
commence, we're trying to have a global strategy which starts, I should remind you, by a number of reforms that have improved the context for the development of companies in general over the past few years, with the reform on corporate taxes, stabilization of CIR, which is very important for health, or the reduction in production taxes, which is very good for the productivity of our companies, and simplification measures with what is called ASAP law. And we can see that everything that has been done has enabled us to be, for the second year in a row, the most attractive country in Europe for industrial investment, so 2019 and 2020. And it shows that foreign investors consider us as attractive, and this will be completed with specific elements from the Forum on Health. During the recovery plan, we made a major effort for the healthcare industry. We gave 700 million euros to support the resilience of our productive system in the healthcare area. So these are significant amounts. For as far as innovation is concerned, we've focused our efforts and financial means and regulatory elements in 3 areas: biotherapy, bioproduction, with innovative therapies, innovative treatments, where we put in 800 million euros to stimulate innovation and startup companies. Second thrust, digital health, with all the innovations that mobilize the digital world for health. So 650 million euros are dedicated to that strategy. And in the first calls, first tenders, we got 600 answers, a huge number, very rich ecosystem of startup companies, SMEs, big groups, big corporations that can develop digital health. We have a lot of work on a big project on image processing and all the applications for health, with the mobilization of the ecosystem on AI, which is very rich in France. And the third strategy is much more about emerging and infectious diseases, where we mobilize the public research apparatus in order to bring up innovations that can lead to startup companies with 750 million euros. So huge amounts, very focused over time, to give a major impulse to all the innovative companies in France and to public labs, enabling them to create real innovations in these areas. Then there's another element which I mentioned earlier about the simplification of market access. We also have a challenge as far as incentives given for price setting. This is a major topic, and a lot of decisions were made in order to support investments for the price of medication, with mechanisms such as the one called CREDIX, which will enable, which were also part of the announcement of the president during the CSIS. And this is a very good job done by the head of the CSIS. And the idea being to have very strong incentives for the link on investment for R&D and the price setting for medication.
Dans cette politique dans laquelle on essaie de couvrir tous les aspects du développement économique du secteur, il y a les fonds propres, les fonds pour la croissance. On a, je pense que Olivier BOGILLOT a eu raison de mentionner les fonds TIBI qui sont vraiment une rupture dans ce domaine, et ils ont donc, les fonds TIBI ont mobilisé 2 milliards d'euros, on a un levier jusqu'à 20 milliards d'euros, levé par ces fonds, et leur thèse d'investissement, c'est vraiment le mettre and their investment theory is about c'est vraiment nouveau dans le paysage français. Vous avez raison de dire que ça n'existait pas, mais je crois que ça émerge avec ces fonds TIBI. C'est une réponse nouvelle qui apparaît, et on mise beaucoup sur ces fonds qui catalysent l'investissement privé pour aider notamment les startups en late stage à aller plus loin, plus vite. Et puis, au-delà de ces fonds TIBI, on a aussi une intervention de BPI France à qui on a confié 2 milliards d'euros de fonds propres, soit en fonds directs, soit en fonds de fonds pour les 5 prochaines années, et qui doit là aussi avoir apporter
they're
des
not
fonds
investing so
propres
much
aux
on
entreprises qui
the
en ont besoin pour
startup
leur
next stage, but
développement.
rather
Donc on essaie de
providing
couvrir
own
toute la gamme des
equity
besoins.
to
On
companies
concentre
that
vraiment
need
sur un
them.
petit nombre d'années,
We are
un effort
focusing
considérable
on
de
a
l'État pour
small number
soutenir
of years,
l'innovation
a
en santé.
huge effort from the
Et on
state
mise sur
to
le fait que
support
ça peut
companies in
vraiment
the field
faire
of
de la
healthcare.
France, de la
And
France
we
en Europe et de
believe,
l'Europe en
and we
général,
gamble on the
un
fact that
leader
this
sur
is going
les
to
nouvelles
turn France
thérapies,
into
sur
a
les capacités de
leader
production
on
aussi dans
new
les prochaines années.
therapies and production capacities for the next few years.
On a parlé du CSIS, Muriel. Alors
We talked about
concrètement,
CSIS, Muriel.
qu'est-ce que c'est ces mesures
So,
et qu'est-ce qui
what
nous fait croire
about
que cette
those
fois-ci,
measures?
allez, c'est du concret
Why
ça va
should we
délivrer.
believe that this time we're going to deliver?
Tout ce que vient de dire Thomas
Well,
Courbe,
everything
je
that
crois que
Thomas
c'est
just
vraiment,
said.
un résultat tout à fait
I mean, it's
enthousiasmant
already a
et nous
very
qui avons
encouraging
passé
result.
un peu plus de 4
We
mois,
have
ça a été
spent more
intense,
than 4
on a
months.
eu quand
It
même
was very intense,
un temps très réduit, mais ça nous
and
a
we
permis
didn't have
vraiment
much time, but we really made a huge effort. It was very intense work, and we worked at a very fast pace to build this project, which is actually covering the whole scope, as I said at the beginning, research with needs that were identified some time ago already, and what was announced by the President of the Republic is absolutely essential in order to support fundamental research, but also clinical research. And clinical research itself was lagging behind. Time to markets were very long and criticized. Yes, a few progress had been made, but now we are launching something really new, something efficient. And we're also talking about a site policy. It's very much into what we're trying to achieve, find the focus of the forces. It was done in Boston, it can be done elsewhere. And the idea is to have a couple of sites which will attract everything that is good in France, everything that represents a French excellency, university, academics, research, healthcare, industry, pharma industry, training in general. And the fact that we brought together strength and excellence, we also attracted new programs to attract young researchers, and you know, this is all about creating new ecosystems which will draw talents. This can be found in other countries, and there's no reason why it's not going to work in France. France has many talents. France has skills. So there's no reason why we should not be ourselves a cluster, maybe with a local strength or maybe an even broader strength global, but we are going to attract the right people. And if we want to attract companies, well, we have to let them know that they will be supported, that they will be supported throughout the process until the access to market. Well, we talk about access to market for patients, obviously patients are what I'm interested by. So yes, they will be supported throughout the process, and we have tried to create a good workflow. President CSIS said we had to simplify early access. This is one of our, actually I must say this is one of our French trump cards, which was already also adopted on the European level. But yes, we have to simplify the process. So early access to the drug for compassionate reasons, before even the drug is on the market, and a lot of work was done by NSM and HAS and the governments, the state services. So we have early access for innovative and breakthrough drugs for which there are no alternatives, so compassionate access. And for the rest, we had this very complex stage during which the High Health Authority needs to assess the drug and give it an early authorization for several levels, but level 4 is not yet access to market. Doesn't mean that you have already gained access to market. There are several levels. The additional list is open for level 4 ASMRs, and those are innovations that can be made accessible to patients before the drug is on the market.
Comme l'a dit Thomas Courbe,
post-HAS, there is also the post-HAS assessment access. It's
l'idée de détacher le patient de la procédure administrative qui va vers le prix, donc on garantit jusqu'à l'évaluation qu'on est bien dans une certitude scientifique, une évaluation du bénéfice-risque pour l'autorisation de mise sur le marché, puis du service du progrès thérapeutique représenté par le produit par la HAS, mais une fois qu'on a cette certitude, le patient il n'a pas le temps, surtout quand il est atteint d'une pathologie grave, comme un cancer ou des pathologies qui menacent le pronostic vital, il ne peut pas attendre que les gens qu'il y ait un accord sur le prix, et donc c'est l'idée de lui permettre d'y accéder dès cette certitude que c'est quelque chose qui est utile pour lui. Et donc ça va faire l'objet de... Bien sûr, ça n'est pas simple. Et le PLFSS est en train de le valider et puis il va y avoir des discussions pour savoir exactement comment ça va se passer. Mais la France va permettre cet accès en se basant sur l'intérêt du patient. Ça sera sans doute le plus tôt possible pour tous les patients d'accéder au réel progrès thérapeutique. Et puis, la suite, on ne s'arrête pas là. Il faut absolument avoir des confirmations ou affirmations de ce qui a été présumé au travers d'essais cliniques avec une population très sélectionnée. La suite, c'est bien sûr le post-autorisation, ce qu'on appelait ces études en vie réelle. Demain, ça va être beaucoup plus solide et robuste en termes de données, avec de nouveaux essais de type essais adaptatifs, essais in silico avec les données. Maintenant, on a un système de données en France comme en Europe qui nous permet de réaliser des études avec des résultats très robustes. On a des essais qui doivent être mis en place. On a vu avec le Covid qu'on n'avait pas assez d'essais qui se réalisaient chez la majorité des gens, c'est-à-dire quand ils sont en ambulatoire. On ne sait pas faire des essais chez les médecins généralistes ou dans les pharmacies. Et ça nécessite de définir des méthodes. On voit bien qu'on manque un pan entier de la thérapeutique. Donc cet ensemble-là va permettre de mieux comprendre et d'accumuler plus de sciences pour le progrès suivant et savoir à quel patient on doit donner le meilleur traitement ou l'ensemble des traitements qu'on doit combiner, médicaments, dispositifs médicaux,
and maybe a combination of therapies or medical device or connected device or artificial intelligence-based device, coordination between the healthcare professionals.
Cet ensemble-là
this
est assez
array
unique,
of
semble-t-il, et donc
possibilities is quite unique, and it will attract industries and pharma companies so that they will come to France to organize early phase trials, phase 1 trials. You know, our teams are among the best. And this will be then supported. And so we hope to attract to France companies that will build production lines so that we can also avoid shortages, because if we work together with Europe, we will be able to bring back to France the production of active ingredients. We will be able to produce the drug from the active ingredients to the finished product in the safest way. Again, and this is a whole
qui ont été
list of things
reformulés
for
au
which we
travers
have
du
made
programme
proposals, which were then reviewed
Thomas Courbe et qui a
in
donc été annoncé
the
par le
program
président de la
described by Thomas
République
Courbe
et qui est déjà
and announced by the President of the Republic.
Il n'y a pas que
And
le
this is already in
PLFSS,
progress.
déjà il y a des mesures
It's
dans
not
le
just the
PLFSS, mais
PNFSS.
aussi
I mean, there are the
la
actions
Haute Autorité
taken
de
within
Santé,
the
les
PNFSS,
administrations, les
but there is the
industries.
High Health
Tout le
Authority,
monde
there are the
a un petit peu
administrations,
sa
there is
feuille
the
de route,
pharma
et puis il y a bien sûr
industry.
ce
We
projet de
all have
création
our
de l'Agence de
work
l'innovation
cut
en
out for us.
santé
We
qui
have our
va
roadmaps, and the
apporter cette coordination qu'on voit bien que tout ce qui a été dit un peu toute la journée, les silos, le manque de coordination et surtout le manque de visibilité. En fait, c'est surtout ça, les industries ou les startups ou tous les entrepreneurs ont besoin de comprendre comment ça se passe et donc pouvoir avoir un guichet où on vient chercher de l'aide
where people can find help and support and will be told, okay, this is how you're supposed to do it, to make sure that the product gets the market authorization, that you get the proper funding and that you get the proper procedures. That's the project. That's what we're working on. It's not easy, but we are recreating a new agency, and we're going to try and avoid simply stacking administrative layers, and rather we would like to come up with an agency that is really going to be a useful tool and something that will allow to make the workflow much more flowing.
Par production, bioproduction, évidemment, Olivier.
So what about the circuit in France? Well, I would like to congratulate the French administration regarding the originality of the CSIS method. It used to be people staring at each other, the pharma companies and the public administration. Now they have auditioned many, many people in a much deeper way than just the pharma. There was technical medicine, veterinary medicine, biotechnologies, diagnostic devices. And as I said earlier in my introduction, healthcare industries have been weakened during the last 20 years, and it's a very good thing that it was made, that they became aware. Minus 24% between 2011 and 2018, whereas the Germans increased by several percent and the Chinese increased 200% their investment over the same period, where we decreased our investment. So it's very, very important that people are aware of this and that this is being acknowledged. We need more private research, we need more public research, and we need more of a mix between private and public research. It was announced there will be clusters, there will be ecosystems with bioproduction. I would like to talk about messenger RNA because now everybody knows what mRNA, messenger RNA is thanks to COVID. It is a revolution, it is a breakthrough. It has made a proof of concept with 3 billion people.
Il est essentiel que, et tout le monde s'est rendu compte que
now everybody realizes that the technology allows to have a vaccine in 6 to 8 months when an epidemic happens. So we need to have production capacities in France, in Europe for messenger RNA. Many announcements have been made and we are very happy to invest on this technology. Lipid nanoparticles, we need them for messenger RNA production and we don't have them, we can't make them in France, and that's important. Also something else I would like to add.
La bioproduction en tant que telle.
Bioproduction as such.
On est extrêmement dépendant de l'externe.
We're very dependent on external companies. Only a few percent of biotherapies are produced in France. We import more than 90%. We used to be the leader in 2004. In less than 20 years, we went down to 4th position behind after the Italians. So the Santé Health 2030 program announced by the President aims at catching up. And if we can do everything we've announced, well, I'd like to introduce a nuance because many announcements have been made. However, we live in a country where, the sustainability of drug production depends on public funding. And we know that the economic situation in France leads us to the reaction to close the taps and try to manage the economic situation. So we can't both have strategies to relaunch an area, an industry, and then not give it the necessary funding. I mean, if we have to take that in consideration in the many documents and laws that we're going to vote. And we can talk about early access, early compassionate access to the drug. But what it boils down to is that we need to give the pharma industry more impetus, more steam, and this is how we will catch up. Yes, we need to stay away from old reflexes. Thank you very much for this very inspiring debate. Thanks to John and Anna Maria thank you for flying from the US and Germany. Appreciate.
Next topic, payers' perspective on how to ensure One Health.